Welcome back to the Donkey Vote podcast with Francis.
Tobias.
And George. These interviews will be focusing on the past careers of politicians before they entered parliament.
With a strong intention to our audience that anything is achievable no matter what you studied in university or college.
If you like this sort of content, please make sure you like, subscribe, comment, and share with your friends. Also, we are on YouTube and Spotify, so make sure you follow us on those platforms.
Make sure to follow us on Instagram as well to keep updated with the latest episodes and reels that we release.
Enjoy
the
the
interview.
Today we are joined by Matt Cuthbert, the head of policy, I think, for the Democratic Alliance and the member for Galtang. Correct me if I'm wrong there, Matt.
Gauteng, yes. I'm a
Gauteng,
member
yes.
of Parliament from the province of Gauteng, yes.
From Gauteng, yes. So thank you for joining us, Matt. Really appreciate you coming onto the podcast. Just for our audience who may not know a lot about you and your home province, could you give us a little brief description of yourself just before we get into the questions?
Sure. So I got involved in politics at about 18 years of age when I went to university. I went to university at the University of Pretoria, where I studied political science and history. And I became actively involved in my party, which is the Democratic Alliance, which is a liberal party, a centre-right on the spectrum. And I was a student leader at the university itself. And when I finished my degree, I then went on to work as a political staffer for the Democratic Alliance in the same province of Gauteng. And shortly thereafter, I was elected to the local council as a proportional representation councillor, and I served on the Committee for Economic Development. I spent about 3 years in the council, and then in 2019, I was elected to Parliament from Gauteng, where I served on the Trade, Industry and Competition Committee for 4 years. And then about a year and a half ago, I was appointed as the party's head of policy, which means that I'm in charge of putting together the party's manifesto, our policy platform, providing policy advisories and guiding our general party positioning on issues that are relevant to society and relevant to our voters. I think just a little bit more about our province. So our province of Gauteng is geographically the smallest province, but by far one of the most populous provinces. It's the economic hub of South Africa, particularly with large cities such as Johannesburg, Pretoria, and Ekurhuleni located there, which have historically contained all of the big financial services firms, as well as a large mining history and so forth. And we are one of the most well-represented provinces within the National Assembly, which is our national parliament. And I am located in a constituency towards the east of the province, in a place called Davidton and Atwatwa, which are two township areas or informal areas, which would be known internationally. And that is where I focus on growing my local structures, making sure that we assist the residents with service delivery issues, and ultimately championing the party's election messaging as well as our policy platform in those specific areas.
Which is a very, very important role to have, especially within a political party, being able to develop policy and that sort of thing. So I'm glad you come on the podcast here, Matt. So we might as well get straight into the questions. So my first question to you is, and you did say this before we were recording, you did talk a little bit about this, but how was your high school and university life? And do you have any memorable moments you'd like to share on the podcast?
Sure. So I think I had quite an interesting experience, particularly during high school. I started school where I'd grown up, which was in Pretoria, in Gauteng. And it was a very interesting time, I think, in the country, and particularly to be a young person in the country, because we had already been, I would say, roughly, 18 to 20 years into democracy. And, the way and the shape in which society had formed itself was rather different. As I mentioned to you earlier, then went off to Australia for a year and lived in Melbourne, on the opposite side of where you are located. And I had an experience because my mum had got a job transfer over there, and I found it very, very different to South Africa. Whilst diverse, I did find it to be, something that took a bit of getting used to. I think things are maybe slightly more formal in South Africa than what they are in Melbourne. And I found that there was a more of a, how would I put it? A more carefree attitude, and people seem to be a lot more at ease in Australia than us stiff upper lip South Africans. And I think from that perspective, it was a unique experience. But nonetheless, I enjoyed my time there. And then I came back to South Africa and finished off my high school. I always had a particular interest in history. I was quite interested in getting involved in politics. Unfortunately, there wasn't the opportunity to get involved because my party didn't have a structure where I lived. But I sort of developed my political interest during my younger years. I had an aunt who was very involved in the same political party and its predecessors. And we'd have a number of lunchtime and dinner time conversations around, politics and particularly our party. And that sort of drove the interests that I had. I then went off to university and I wasn't 100% sure what it is I wanted to study. But eventually I settled on studying international relations. I got 2 years into that. And once I got into that, I decided I think that, sort of domestic political career is more to my liking. And I decided to switch degrees, finished that off, and was really, really involved in campus politics itself, ran a number of campaigns to try and get representatives from our party elected, was very involved in our house structures, and really focused on trying to make sure that we could get as best as possible student accommodation for the learners who weren't able to get adequate accommodation, who weren't able to access student financing, and ultimately also just to drive a sort of inclusive space for all students to get involved in campus politics, to want to have an active stake in their future and, determine what it is that they wanted to do, making use of their hard work and their talents.
Which is incredibly important. I know in South Africa as well, there's a lot of disproportionate. There's a lot of poverty, especially within certain communities within South Africa. So giving those people that certain opportunity, whether that be housing or education, is so important to uplifting their lives and making them, actually, achieve something in their lives and, pushing them forward as people.
Yes, most certainly. Most certainly. We have one of the most unequal countries in the world. We obviously come from a very painful past. We know that the previous administration has not acquitted themselves to the best of their abilities. And we sit with a number of challenges ranging from massive unemployment numbers to inconsistent supply of electricity, water shortages, and a number of other issues which exacerbate the poverty and the inequality in our country. And we're really hoping that with the seventh administration, and particularly the involvement of a multi-party government, that we'll be able to, go some way in addressing all of these deep-rooted social issues which our country experiences on a daily basis.
Which is quite sad, but hopefully, optimistically, with the new government informed, that being a multi-party government, the first time in history in South Africa where it's been a coalition technically of multiple political parties, and two of the biggest, the Democratic Alliance and the ANC. Hopefully, and I'm probably seeing as well after the first couple of months, there's actually been quite a lot of change happening, and South Africa does improve, especially with those core sort of issues. Because previously, talking to a lot of South African MPs, that we've talked to a lot of from the Democratic Alliance as well. Some of these core issues that in Australia that we take for granted, like whether that be electricity, roads, just key infrastructure, which we have here, it's just in some parts of the country it just doesn't exist, and those are some really core issues which need to be addressed immediately.
No, 100%. And I think we found ourselves in a situation where, in parts, we've got very, very developed areas, very developed infrastructure. And in some ways, local citizens have been able to sort of insulate themselves against the state by making sure that they get renewable energy technologies in their home, that they put alternative water solutions in their homes, and are skilled and are able to actually, generate an income for themselves, be able to provide a livelihood for their families. But for the vast majority of South Africans, that is not possible. And if we are to close that gap, ultimately, we need to be able to get those fundamentals in place so that we can grow the economy, get people into jobs, and ultimately unlock opportunity. And that's the only way in which we're going to be able to do this. I just want to correct one point which you made earlier. This is actually not the first time that we've had a multi-party coalition at national level. You would remember that we would have had a government of national unity in the early 90s post-apartheid,
Yes.
where the National Party, the ANC, and the IFP were actually in a coalition together. And that lasted, I think, up until 1997 when the National Party walked away because of certain non-negotiable items that they felt weren't addressed by the ANC. So I thought I'd just put that out there.
Yeah. My South African political history there, Matt, is still it's a work in progress. So thank you for putting that disclaimer in. But yes, moving on then to our next question for you, Matt. I'm just seeing on just because we know we're lacking time. So prior to Parliament, you served as a constituency officer, as you said in your previous earlier statement, helping mobilize local campaigns for the DA in your hometown of is it Urqa Hulweni? in Gauteng province.
Ekurhuleni, yes.
Ekurhuleni, yeah,
Ekurhuleni,
yes,
yes.
yeah. So how did this CO work, this constituency officer work, specifically help you in your political career?
So I think it gave me good practical experience on the ground. Left university and was flung into a very strange place, Benoni, which is on the east or the eastern part of Gauteng. It was very different to where I had grown up. And also a large proportion of that constituency consisted of township and rural wards, which I had not had as much exposure in prior to that. It gave me a deeper understanding of, I think, the challenges that, ordinary South Africans face. It made me understand how the political machine operates and what it is that you need to do to effectively represent your voters, to try and grow your support levels in a given area, and ultimately to provide support to the residents of that specific area through the resolution of service delivery issues, supporting the local public representatives. Because I think, unlike Australia, we have a proportionally representative system. Particularly at a national level, it's slightly different at local government level. And the fact is that our party actually puts together, self-assigned constituencies. So we draw up those boundaries and then we allocate either a member of parliament or a member of provincial legislature to those kinds of areas. And then the constituency office is there in effect to support the, member of parliament or the member of the provincial legislature. And ultimately, our goal is to obviously root ourselves in those communities, grow our vote share in those specific communities, and ultimately try and, change the circumstances of the individuals who live in those communities.
And I was previously talking to one of your other colleagues a couple of days ago. It was actually, yes, sorry, yeah, it was Kevin Milham, and we were discussing a lot about the South African proportional system, and he was really proposing the fact that maybe one day you might have a mixed proportional system where it's a bit like New Zealand in a sense where there's a constituency or riding sort of base, and then there's also MPs who get elected from the list. Because as you were saying as well, and probably a lot of South Africans do feel this as well. A lot of South Africans probably don't really know who's actually representing them specifically, because sometimes in a state like your state, like Gauteng or Western Cape or KwaZulu-Natal, they're massive provinces, and small communities may be left behind in a sense because, in general, probably major political parties will be focusing on the more metropolitan areas, but rural communities, for example, may be left behind just because they don't have a specific representative for that specific area.
Yes, certainly. I mean, our proposal as a party is for a multi-member constituency, a mixed system. So a proportion of our MPs would be elected off a list, and then we'd have pre-designated or demarcated constituencies, which a multitude of members would then be elected to on what we call an open list. And that basically means that we'd have a whole bunch of DA candidates, a whole bunch of ANC candidates and other political parties, and voters would then be able to choose the candidates of their choice to represent them. I think that there are definitely some benefits to a directly elected system, in terms of making sure that there's a close connection with the community. However, due to our history rather, and seeing sort of, the results of, first past the post elections in the US and in the United Kingdom, they can also have adverse effects and not adequately represent the entire populace. So let's look, for example, at the UK, where you could have, the Liberal Democrats who get roughly 18% of the vote, but they don't necessarily end up with 18% of the seats, in Westminster. And that's ultimately a perverse outcome because the voters are not adequately represented or their views not represented. But then on the other hand, you get a situation like in South Africa where you find yourself with a proportional system, and often only 40,000 votes, particularly at a national level, can get you a seat in Parliament. And that specific individual could try and hold others to ransom, through demanding positions, through demanding certain sorts of gratifications, and ultimately destabilize governance. We've seen that in a number of our cities across the country, particularly in the city of Johannesburg, which is in a rather untenable situation, and these small one-man parties have in effect actually crippled governance, and actually put these cities on the path towards absolute ruin. And that's why we propose an alternative model. And this is something that we'll be actively contributing towards as we review the electoral system, because there's a process that's currently underway to do so.
Mm-hmm. And as you're saying, it is quite true in, the first past the post system in the UK and the US, you get disproportional sort of results. And even sometimes, ironically, even the two-party preferred system that we have in Australia with the voting of preferential voting, which not many countries actually have. Sometimes you do get some very weird results. Like one, I know in the state of South Australia a couple of times, the Liberals have sometimes won the two-party preferred 52 to 48. But since all the vote is concentrated, all their voters are concentrated in the regional areas and not in the city, the Labor Party will still be able to win government because they won more voters and more seats in the city. So sometimes it can be a bit unfair in a sense that there's more of the population voting for one specific party, but just because their vote were in areas where they had safe seats or safe areas and not in the more marginal or other areas, then sometimes it can be disproportionate. But as we were saying, probably there's not really a perfect system that can fully represent everybody. But but the system probably that in South Africa right now is probably of course, you can do better than that, seeing as South Africa is a young democracy.
100%. 100%.
Yeah.
Always things to work on, but I think, democracy is never perfect, but it's something that we need to uphold and something that we further need to entrench.
Exactly.
And ultimately, I think, we're at least on the right trajectory. It's just about getting in place those key reforms to make sure that we can enhance democracy and ultimately enshrine all of those key values which we believe in, such as freedom, the rule of law, justice, and ultimately, a more equal society.
I agree with you there, Matt. So moving on then to our next question. Additionally, you did serve as a councillor for Ekurhuleni for nearly 3 years prior to Parliament. How was your work on council different from your work currently now in National Parliament? And what were some of the challenges you saw in your local community as a councillor?
Sure. So I think at a local government level, the difference is, I think, number one, from a practical point of view, it's a part-time role versus it being a full-time role when you are a member of the provincial legislature or a member of parliament. And therefore, there are less meetings which, are required to be attended. I often think as politicians, we are professional meeting attenders, and at times can be quite frustrating. But mostly you focused on more local issues and particularly sort of key local government competences. So you focused on sort of refuse removal, you focused on, basic electricity provision, you focused on water, you focused on sanitation, and, the real bread and butter issues that affect communities, at the lowest possible level. And I think what is difficult as a councillor is to understand that you are faced with this myriad of challenges that your residents have, but you don't always have the power to be able to do so. And I was an opposition councillor, so we had to agitate to try and get change through. So whether that be through petitions, drafting motions in the House, asking difficult questions of the members of the mayoral committee and the mayor, that was really the only mechanism that we had available to us to try and create public pressure to change things. So it was a long and hard slog, and I think also a very good way at understanding how local political dynamics, play out. What the role of sort of community leadership is, what the role of other political parties are, what to root out in those communities. I mean, the sort of wide-scale corruption that is faced in many of our communities because of patronage politics. So I really think it gives you the sort of earning your stripes, portion of your career being a councillor, because it is really a difficult job. And, I think it's definitely an undervalued job, in the political sphere, because often councillors have to be subjected to significant abuse from residents who are frustrated because their expectations are not met. And ultimately, you've got to try and manage those expectations, and on the same hand, try and get those people to vote for you at the end of the day. And that's a very difficult balance to maintain. But nonetheless, I did enjoy my time in the council. I think I gained invaluable experience, and definitely experience that put me in good stead for the rest of my political career.
Yeah. And speaking of your political progression, you now serve actually as the head of policy for the DA. And without giving too much away, I know it's a pretty high portfolio position within the DA. What does your role entail, and how important is head of policy to political party campaigns?
So my role, as I'd alluded to earlier, is basically generating the parties and conceptualizing the party's policy platform. So that includes all areas from the economy to health to social welfare to energy and the like. That obviously, ends up in being sort of full policies that will put out long documents that are equivalent of, master's research reports, which are evidence-based, which focus on our values and our principles and practical solutions to resolving the challenges that we identify in society. We also look at position papers on topical issues that come up. We inform legislative decisions that are taken by our caucus by making sure that they are aware of all of the implications of the legislation that serves before Parliament. We also play a stakeholder role in engaging with industry experts, academics, the media, to try and make sure that there's a greater awareness around our policies. Because I do believe in the simple mantra that if nobody knows about it, then it doesn't exist. And therefore, it's important for us to make sure that we actively, release and distribute our material, make sure that we engage people around our material. So that is really what our focus has been, during my time in office. I think from a party perspective, I think it's important to provide the leadership of the party with sort of policy strategic direction and understanding of what the lay of the land is. As you would know, party leaders are often very busy and have a number of
Exactly.
tasks to juggle at a given time. And therefore, to have somebody specifically focused on policy gives them a sort of, counsel to allow them to actually rely on somebody's research and work in making some difficult decisions relating to policy matters. This is particularly relevant in the context of our government of national unity, where all of the parties don't necessarily agree on everything. And there have already been a couple of instances where there have been public policy disagreements. And it's important for us to, number one, still retain our unique identity within that government, and number two, stick true to our values and principles, and ultimately, ensure that we represent voters on the ticket to which we were elected. And we put a certain set of promises in our manifesto, which the policy unit developed, and we need to ensure that we follow through on those promises that we made, and ultimately stick good with what it is that we intend on doing to try and improve the lives of our citizens.
And I guess with the National Government of Unity, seeing as you were saying, there's a lot of political parties with different manifestos. Probably some towards more the right side of politics, and some which would probably be considered quite left-wing political parties. So trying to bring it all together, and that sort of thing, is quite difficult. But as you're saying, keeping true to your values, but also being able to work with others in a government of unity in this sense is really, really important. And that cooperation, and sometimes. Probably not always the best circumstance, but having to give in and come up with a compromise might be the best way to actually govern and improve the lives of all South Africans.
No, 100%. I think we are in coalition country. It's a very complex time. It's a very interesting time. And it's something that we are going to have to navigate for the foreseeable future. I think that one party dominance is largely dead in South Africa. And we now need to make sure that our institutions, that our legislation, as well as our policies and our procedures are actually adapted in such a way that allows for a conducive coalition environment. What we've seen in our city since 2016 with the rise of coalitions has been fraught with all sorts of instability, ultimately led to service delivery, grinding to a steady halt. And we cannot allow that to happen on a national level. And that's why it's important for us to be able to adapt to this new environment and ultimately be able to have a smooth transition in towards the sort of the coalition context within which we operate.
100% agree with you there, Matt. So moving on then to our next question, we are running out a bit of time. But who would you say actually is your political role model or idol, Matt?
So this is a question I think many a politician is asked. And I wouldn't say that I really idolize one specific politician or somebody who I would say I wanted to be like, per se, because often, politicians, will say, well, I saw Barack Obama, or I saw Winston Churchill, or I saw XYZ. I haven't really developed my political career around that. I've had some very significant influences in my life, in my political career. I can think of colleagues such as Ashwell Sarapin, Michelle Clark, amongst several others who've really played a very, very significant role in my own personal development. but I've always aligned myself with what it is I believe in and the philosophy with which I follow. And that's largely, grounded by the thinking of John Rawls, the thinking of John Maynard Keynes, and the like. And it's always been about the values and the principles for me, and that's guided my actions. And I believe if I'm able to act in such a way that's consistent with my values and principles, then 9 times out of 10, I'm going to make the right decision.
Exactly.
And I think by having done that and having taken that active choice rather than trying to stylize myself around a specific politician, I think it's for my own political career enhanced my own durability in the arena because, as you can understand, it's quite a contested arena. I think it's also allowed me to sleep at night because I think that's an important element of politics. You want to be able to sleep at night and have a clean conscience. And I think that values-based leadership and values-led leadership is the most important thing that any young aspiring politician can latch onto, because that's what's really going to get you through the difficult times in your political career and ultimately guide what it is that you want to achieve and the sort of objectives you set for yourself as a young politician.
Exactly, exactly. And one of the other things that's been brought up as well in the podcast, but this question is the fact that a politician you may idolize in the past might not necessarily be good for the current modern day times that you're representing the people. Because, for example, maybe someone in a South African politician back in the 70s or 60s wouldn't be relevant towards the South Africa of 2024 or of beyond. So being able to, I guess, forge your own path and develop your own views and distinct values as a politician is extremely important. And necessarily, it might be good in some circumstances to have someone you look up to and someone you see as a good politician in the past, but not necessarily be able to try and emulate and copy exactly what they did, because at the end of the day, we live in different times and the world keeps evolving every single day. So, yeah.
100%. And we all individuals, right? We don't want
Yeah.
cookie cutter versions of people running around.
Mm.
And you can, take the knowledge and the learnings that people teach you, but ultimately you need to be yourself and you need to stand on your
Exactly.
own 2 feet. You don't want to be a member of a member. And I
Mm.
think that's the most important thing to remember as a young
Mm.
politician is you've got to chart your own path. It's a careful
Exactly.
path you've got to chart, and you've got to be mindful of what it is that you do. But you must be your own person, and you mustn't be beholden to any kind of special interest or vested interest.
Exactly, exactly. 100% agree with that, Matt. And I think we'll move on then to our final question, seeing as we're about to hit about 30 minute we're about to hit the 30-minute mark. But Matt, finally, what's one piece of advice you give to students in 2024, especially those who are starting university and high school, as I know they would be in South Africa currently?
Well, I think firstly, pay more attention to your undergraduate university studies than I did. I was too involved in politics, I think, at the time. Use that opportunity to learn as much as you possibly can, read as much as you possibly can, build your networks because those networks will hold you in good stead for the rest of your life, and ultimately have fun and learn about life, learn about different kinds of experiences, try and take on board other people's perspectives, keep an open mind. And in doing so, you're going to have a far more fulfilled and enriched life. And if I could give my younger self advice, I would give myself that exact advice because I think that that's the right way to go about doing things.
Exactly, exactly. And at the end of the day, you only live once, so taking every opportunity is so important. And maybe for young aspiring politicians out there, don't probably base your whole life as an 18, 19-year-old fully on politics, because you do lose the great assets of experiencing other things and things outside of politics at the end of the day. So taking every experience that's there, taking every opportunity that's there is really crucial to setting yourself up into the future, whether that be as a politician or whether that be in a different career that you're interested in.
100%. 100%. You want to be a well-rounded individual. You don't want to become a political hack. So,
Exactly.
yeah, so
Exactly.
make sure that you have a well-rounded experience and you actually able to, learn as much as you can from a variety of things. And that doesn't necessarily have to just be formal education. There are many things that you informally pick up at university. And I think that's something important for young people to consider.
100% agree with that, Matt. So those are all our questions and for you, Matt. I do appreciate you coming on the podcast and speaking to us, even as the head of policy for the DA. I do really appreciate you sparing some time and speaking to all our viewers out there, especially about your career before politics, your current role within the DA, and some advice you give to students in 2024. So thank you again for coming on and spending some time with us.
Thanks very much, Francis, and all the best with your podcast. It's great work that you guys are doing, and I look forward to looking at the video once it's out.